Ah, there you are. Welcome back to the GameDev Tavern. Come on in, warm yourself by the fire, and come build some games with me. My name is Nicholas, and this is episode 18 of the tutorial series where we create a pixel art beat-em-up game in Godot. And welcome back. In the last episode, we added some sound, music, and screen shake effects. And while some of those really add to the game, it's important to always stay mindful of the players who will enjoy your game. So perhaps they already have some music playing in the background and they want to be able to play your game with just the sound effects on. Perhaps they don't appreciate the volume of the sound effects that you have put on, or perhaps just the repetitive screen shake effect is causing some amount of discomfort. In any case, it's always important to provide some options for the player to fine-tune their experience. So today we're going to build an options menu which will allow the player to fine-tune the various settings, including the volume of the music, sound effect, and the ability to toggle the screen shake off. So we briefly talked about how to reskin existing components, and we've actually done this for the label here. And so we could continue to do this to build our entire game UI. These components are very effective. They have a lot of functionality for localization, for other types of input than the keyboard, such as the mouse, gamepad, and so forth. And so those are really, really powerful. And typically, we'd want to take the time to reskin all of those components to have our proper UI. However, in the spirit of building things from scratch, today I want to illustrate how we can build a very simple UI screen by creating our own UI components. So this is the option screen that we're going to be building. It only contains 3 options for modifying the sound of music, sound effects, and toggle the screen shake effect on or off. It also contains a return button, which will be closing the dialog. So overall, just 4 possible options to choose from, and 1 option will always be active. Now, the content is going to be centered on the screen. We're going to have margins of 13 pixels to the left and to the right, and then 5 pixels to the top and to the bottom. And the way this is going to work is very straightforward. Basically, pressing up and down on the keyboard will select a different option and make it active in yellow. Pressing left and right will select a different value within the active option that's currently active. So right now, this music option is the one that's currently active, and it has a value of 1. Pressing an action button on the toggle shake here or on the return label will behave just like clicking on those items. Each option can have a value, and for the volume option here, we can see that the value can go from 0 to 10. For the screen shake option, the value will either be on or off, which will be either 0 or 1. So let's think ahead about how we can build this. First, we can see that there is a common base class that can represent an option. So this scene will always have a label and then a variety of other objects which can be used to represent the value. And when the option becomes active, we can simply use the modulate property to alter the color of all of its content to bright yellow. And when things are not selected or active, we'll just use this dark gray here. And as part of this option, we can also provide a min and a max value and write some common logic to ensure that we don't go out of bounds between those 2 values. Let's say that this base scene is called UI Picker. We can then derive several simple UI controls depending on what values the options contain. A range picker, for example, will contain ticks that are either full or empty, and a toggle picker will contain a simple label to represent the state to be on or off. And finally, the label picker will not need to contain anything, given it doesn't have any associated value. Okay, with all of this ready to go, let's go ahead and start building this in Godot. All right, so we're going to build a new control, and let's click on User Interface. We're going to call this Options Screen. Let's go ahead and save this in our scene/UI folder, and we're going to zoom in a bit. The first thing you want to do is to make sure that the root control has the layout set to full rect, which should be the case by default. Then we'll want to add a background color, and we've already been using a control component for this called color rect. So let's go ahead and add that to the option screen, Control A, color rect, and we are going to set the layout once again to full screen, so it takes the entire width and height, and let's set the color to 14, 14, 14. This is a dark gray. We're going to call this background. Okay, next we are going to be adding a a bunch of content, but we want to make sure that it properly respects the margins that we specified so that it's fairly centered on the screen. And Godot has a very handy node called margin container. So Control A on background, we're going to add that margin container. If you look on the right hand side in the properties, first you want to make sure that you set the layout to full rec so that it takes the full width and height. And then in the theme overrides, you will be able to specify different types of margins for the various sides. And we're going to set 13 pixels to the left, to the right, 5 pixels to the top and to the bottom. Okay, next we'll want to start stacking things up vertically, starting with the options label, and then we'll want to have each option one by one, and then the return label. So in order to nicely place things on a vertical basis, Godot once again has a really handy node called VBox container. So on the margin container, hit Control A and find the VBox container. And here, just to give you an example, let's go ahead and add a label. I'm going to give this a quick test text. And inside our theme, let's make sure we pick the theme that we have already created. And I'm just going to duplicate this label. And you can see that things are nicely ordered vertically, and there's some additional properties which you can do to add or remove more separation between each item. So this is going to be very handy, and we're going to start by adding a label at the top. So let's go ahead and remove those three, and we're going to call this options label. Let's actually change the text to options. And we're going to make a few changes here. So the bright yellow here is great when it's inside the game, but actually within the options menu, we don't want to call attention to things that are not focusable. So we're just going to override that color. You can do this by clicking on theme override, and then you can change here colors that have been set as part of the theme. So here in the font color, I'm just going to set it to bright white, so FFFF. Next, I want to make sure that the text is centered. So if you scroll all the way up to the properties in horizontal alignment, just pick center here. So we can start thinking about how we're going to be building the various options. If you recall the mock, each option was a label followed by a suite of controls horizontally placed to set the value. And so similarly to how Godot proposes a vertical box container, which we've been using here, we can also use a horizontal box container to lay out things properly horizontally. That will be the perfect scene to inherit from. So let's go ahead and create Control A as part of the VBox container. Let's find the horizontal box container. Let's call this activable control. And we're going to start by adding a label. So Control A, label. Let's set the right theme. Let's provide some default text option. We'll be overriding the text color, similar to how we did with options, with white. And we will be using the modulate property as part of the visibility property here to set it to either gray or yellow, depending on whether the option is active or not. Lastly, we want to make sure we have enough room to write the text. So hop over into layout and let's set the custom minimum horizontal size to 30 pixels. Okay, we are going to start creating all of our various UI controls. So let's right click on this activable control and save branch as scene. And this time, let's create a different folder as part of the UI. Let's call this controls. And we can keep activable control here. And we can click here to navigate into the scene directly. The first thing we're going to be doing, zoom in a little bit, is to create a script. So let's create a script as part of this activable control. This is fine. Let's just give it a class name for now. We're going to be taking this one step at a time to make sure that you properly understand. And we can get rid of all of this. All right, so back into the options screen, we want to make sure that the script is attached here. We're going to be, rather than using this base class, we're going to be creating a bunch of inherited classes to represent the various types of controls that we have. So let's start by creating our range picker. So new inherited scene, we're going to pick activable control. Let's call this range picker. And we can save this inside the same folder. And then just to illustrate what this is going to look like, if you look at your folders, you should have a UI ticks on and off image. We're going to be adding a bunch of texture rect and setting that image in the texture property. Set the stretch mode to keep, and keep size. Okay, this is good. So now if you were to duplicate this 10 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 10. Okay, and you can see that things are too far apart. So we can hop over into our base scene and set the horizontal box containers theme override. Let's set the separation to just 1. Now if you save and go back to the range picker, things should look much better. Okay, we're gonna keep this, but we're going to be inheriting from the script, and we'll have our own custom script on top of this. Let's just keep this for now and create the 2 other controls that we need. So scenes, new inherited scenes, activable control. Let's call this one toggle picker. And here the only thing that we'll need is a separate label to display on or off. Let's just duplicate this label here. We can call this value label. And let's just set the text to off, or I'll set it to on for now. Okay, let's save this in the same folder, toggle picker, and we'll have one last one, new inherited scene from activable control. And here, let's just, we can keep it this way, I guess, or although the horizontal alignment is probably going to be centered here. This is going to be, let's rename this to label picker, and let's save this in the same spot. Okay, so back into our options screen, rather than have this base class here, we're going to be instantiating all of the components that we've created up there. So we can remove this, and then on the VBox container, Control-Shift-A, and we're gonna need a range picker for the music volume control. And then let's duplicate this one and call this sound volume control. And then we're going to need a toggle picker. This is going to be our shake. Let's just call it shake toggle. And finally, we're going to need a label picker. This is going to be our return button. Okay, so the first thing that you can see here is that we need to set the proper text in the label. One way you could do this is by right-clicking on those objects and clicking on editable children, and then you can tweak the label directly here. I'm not a big fan of this because when the objects are pretty complex, it just exposes a lot of things that you don't necessarily need. So what I'd rather do is just expose a new text property as part of the activable control. And then inside the code of this activable control, we can just set the labels text to the proper text. So right click, let's remove this, click OK, and let's hop over into the script. And we're going to expose a property called text, which will be of type string. And then inside our ready function, we just hop over into the activable control. We just need to have a reference to this label. So let's mark it at the top. So it'll be of type label, and this is the reference. And we'll just set the label dot text equals text. So now if we go back into our options screen, each of those options should now have a new text property. This one we're going to call music. This one we're going to call SFX, shake. Let's just use shake, and then the return button we'll call return. Okay, and one of the best things that I like about Godot is that you can actually test scenes individually. So here we've created this option screen. You can test it by pressing F6 on your keyboard, or up there in the menu you can run the current scene here. All right, and so you can see that the labels are properly set. So next, we'll want to be able to change the color depending on whether the option is active or not. So we can write the code for this directly as part of the activable control and apply the modulate to all of the children. So hopping back into activable control, let's look at the script here, and we're going to create a method called setActive, which will not return anything. What we want to do here is we'll want to loop over all of the controls, all of the children. And we'll want to set the modulate method, the modulate color, to one of two colors, either the bright yellow if it's active, or the dark gray if it's not active. So this also means that we need a definition of whether something is active or not. So let's add that right here. We'll set it to false by default. And we can also export the colors so that we can set them directly as part of the properties. We'll have one color default and one for the active. Okay, and here we'll want to set the active color if it's active, otherwise the default color. And let's set those colors right now. This default color, we're going to set it to 70, 70, 70. This is the dark gray. And then the active color, we're going to reuse the same bright yellow, which I believe was D0, T0, 00. Let's make sure to use the active parameter here and set the isActive property. Okay, we can now press F6 to get rid of this error if you ever have it. And okay, so now what we want to do is have the option screen called the set active depending on which option is currently selected. So the option screen is going to keep track of the currently selected option and it's going to set active to true or false each of those four items. So let's start by creating a new script for the option screen. We can keep that as part of the UI here. And we will start by giving this a class name. And we'll need references to all of those controls. So let's start by having a couple of already variables. And this is an activable control. All right, and this is going to be the sound volume. Okay, the shake toggle. Make sure you pick the root of each of those controls so that they are actually activable controls. All right, so don't pick like the other ones here. You want to make sure you pick the right reference here. Okay, and here we will have a method called, let's call it refresh. And here we're going to go over each of those four and indicate whether it's active or not. So let's keep a reference to the current menu selection. Index, let's set this to 0 to start with. So the music control will be the first one that will be active. Okay, so we want to loop over those four controls. So it might be convenient to actually put those in an array. In the refresh method, let's call activables. This is going to be an array of activable control. And we're going to set this to music control, SFX control, shake control, and return control. All right, so here we'll want to loop over all of these elements. So let's do a var I in range because we'll need to compare the current selection with where we are in the array. So this is going to be, it's going to go from 0 to activables dot size, and we'll want to set active whether the current selection index is equal to I. Okay, let's call this right away just to test. So in our ready function, let's just call it refresh. All right, and we can test this out, and it should highlight the first one in yellow while the other ones are dark gray. It's not working. It looks like because we set all of these properties before we created those scenes. Let's go ahead and revert those properties here. All right, let's try again, F6. There we go. Okay, so now we can quickly build the logic so that when we press the down key or the up key, we actually change the selection, and then we can just refresh the screen so that it reflects it on properly. So let's have a process method. We're not going to be using delta, and I always like to have a different method for handling input. Just call this handle input, and we're going to create it as a separate method. All right, so here we'll want to check if we just pressed the UI, let's start with UI down. So here we'll want to set the current selection index, and we'll want to increase that by 1, but we want to make sure that it's still contained within this number here. Okay, so maybe we need a reference to this all across this scene. So rather than setting it here, I'm just going to take this off and bring it at the top as an unready variable here. So we have music control. Okay. All right, so now we should have a reference to the activable array. We just want to make sure that we are somewhere in between. So the current selection index, we're going to increase it by 1. We want to be sure that we are between 0 and activables.size. Actually, activables size -1. Okay, and let's go ahead and refresh. And lastly, we'll do the same for UI up, except this is going to be a -1. All right, not entirely sure this will work, so let's go ahead and try this out with F6. And if we press the down key, it goes down all the way to return, and up key goes up. Okay, so this is working well. I still see that there's a lot of horizontal space here, so we'll be fixing this in a second. But then the main thing that we'll need to do is when an option is actually active in bright yellow, we'll need to give it the ability to handle the input, and for the wrench picker to understand what it means to go left and right, which means that we'll set the value accordingly, and for the toggle picker and for the label picker to handle the submit buttons. So let's go ahead and fix this. Let's first fix the horizontal spacing here. So we should be able to do this as part of the activable control. Here, we just want to set the separation to, let's try just 0. Let's see if that makes a difference. I'm going to save, go back to the options screen. Didn't seem to work. Let me just do that manually. There we go. All right. So let's hop over into our activable control script, and here we're going to need to have the notion of value. So let's add a couple of exported variable. We'll want to have the ability to set the current value, which is going to be an integer, this here, and then let's set a min and a max value as well. And then we'll just have a method called setValue, which will take a value as integer, and we will set the current value. Let's use the clamp method once again, and we'll clamp the value between min value and max value. Okay, let's also do a quick print statement just to test this out. And when we change the value of the control, we'll want the UI to reflect as such. Now, the activable control doesn't contain anything that will actually change. But for example, in the wrench picker, when we set the value, we'll want to make sure that we set the proper texture for each of those texture regs. So for that, we'll need to create a method that can be overridden by the wrench picker, toggle picker, and so forth. Let's go ahead and create a dummy refresh method. And here we'll create a method that can just be overridden. Okay, let's also make sure we call this as part of the ready function. Current value. All right, let's hop over into the wrench picker and let's set the current value to 5. Not sure why this is the, and then min value to 0, max value. Let's set this to 9. Since there's 10 of them. And if we go ahead and try this, we should see that the value is 5. However, it does not reflect here in the UI. So let's go ahead and extend the wrench picker script. And let's keep wrench picker here. And the only thing we'll need to do, well, other than give it a class name, is to override the method that we just created. All right, so how is this going to work? Well, we want to set the proper texture for each of those texture regs, We currently have two images, UI tick off, UI tick on. So if you have those in memory, we can just loop over our texture recs and then just set the proper texture. Anytime we need to loop over things, it's always better to have those in an array. So there's two ways we could do this. We could have an array at the top and just list all of those things. We could loop over all of our children and only pick the ones that are texture recs. Or just a simple way we could do is just create another component here, another HBox container, and just add all of those as part of the HBox container. We can call this tix container, and we can just loop over all of these children. It'll probably be cleaner. Let's just make sure we keep the separation to 0 so it doesn't take too much room. All right, so back into the script, let's have a reference to this new tix container. So this is an HBox container. Okay, let's get the children. Tix container get children. Okay, and this is an array of texture rect. All right, and here we'll want to loop over that array. Let's go from 0 to current value. And for those of those, we'll set the tix texture property to the tix on. So we'll need a reference to those things. Let's just go to the top, tick on, and then have one for tick off. Okay, we want to reference the images, and then let's just set that to tick on, and then let's loop over the remainers. So that's, we'll go from current value to tix.size. It should be exclusive. Let's set the proper texture here. I can play like this. All right. Okay, let's press F6 to try the range picker. All right, and you can see that when it initializes, it sets it to ready, and the value is 5, which is exactly what we want. Next, we'll want to understand the inputs. So let's have a method func process, and we're not going to be using delta. And here we'll want to first check if we're currently active, and if we're pressing. Let's start with the left. In this case, we'll just set the value to current value -1. And let's just copy this over and do the same thing. When we go right, we'll want to set this to +1. Let's hop back into the option screen and press F6 here. All right, and now we can see that the value is almost correct. So it goes all the way down to 0 and up to 9. Oh, we need it to up to 10. Let's see, where is our range picker? Set this to 10. There we go. Okay, back into the option screen, F6. There we go. And if you press down, now we have a working range picker. Okay, we'll need to do the same thing for the toggle picker. Let's hop over into the toggle picker scene, and the only thing we'll need to do is change the text of the value label, depending on the current value, whether it's 1 or 0. First of all, let's make sure that we set the default value to on and the max value to 1 as well, and we'll oscillate between those two values. Let's go ahead and extend the script, and we're going to do the same thing as what we did for the range picker. Let's start by giving this a name. And first, let's make sure that we reflect the UI depending on the current values. So let's override our refresh method. And here we'll just set the text of the value label. We'll need a reference to this. And let's set the text to either 1 or 0. We'll set it to on if the current value is 1, otherwise we'll just set it to off. Okay, and now we'll want to process the input keys. Oh, this text. So let's have a process method, and we're not going to be using delta. And here we'll want to first check if we're active, and then we'll want to check if we are pressing any of the following keys. So we'll be looking for the left and right arrow keys, and then we'll also allow the player to do the jump and attack key. Basically, any of those keys will toggle the value between on and off when we get to the option. So rather than have like the full list here of the 4 actions, let me just create a quick external method. Let's just call this has input toggle. And if we do, we'll set the value to 1 if the current value is 0, otherwise we'll set it to 0. Okay, let me go ahead and create this method. And here I'm just going to start by creating the list of actions that we were going to support. So we mentioned we're going to be doing UI left, UI right, and just as a reminder, those actions are all inside your project settings input map. We have some default actions that we're supporting in the game, UI left and UI right, but we also have custom built actions, attack and jump. So we'll use those 4. So UI left, UI right, attack and jump. And now that we have all of the predefined actions listed in an array, we can just loop through that. So for action in actions, if we are pressing the key, we'll return true. And if we've gone through the entire array without returning true, then we'll return false. All right, with that done, we can hop back over into the options screen, press F6, and let's scroll down to shake. And then here, if you use the arrows, you should be able to see the proper value on the left-hand side, and you can actually see it reflected in the UI as well. Okay, that's great. Finally, we'll just need to do the same thing for the return label. Now the return label doesn't have any value, so the only thing we'll need to do here is check if we are pressing one of those keys, probably just the attack and jump key, in which case we'll just emit a signal that can be caught by the options screen to let it know that it needs to close the dialog. So let's go ahead and hop over into the label picker in our 2D view, and we're going to extend the script. Label picker is fine. Let's just give it a class name. And let's have a signal called press. We can get rid of all of this except the process method. We're just going to use an underline here. And let's have, so if is active, and here we'll just do it in parentheses here. So if input.isAction just pressed, and here we'll do attack, or input.isAction just pressed, jump, then we'll emit the signal. Okay, and that's all we need to do for this control. All right, and the last thing we'll do for this episode is just to polish the UI just a tiny bit. So let's hop over into the to-do screen, back into the option screen. And here, let's just align things a little bit better here. So first of all, we're going to create a little bit of spacing between the options label and the various options. And we can do this by just creating a simple control. And given the fact that the vertical box container separates each of the options with some spacing, it will just create some natural spacing. So Control A, let's add a control. Let's call this spacer. And we're going to bring this right above the options label. You can see it creates a little bit of separation. We're also going to duplicate it, and let's place it right before the return button. That way it creates a nice separation between the two. Okay, and next we are going to set the vertical box separation. Let's increase this to 3. We have a little bit more vertical space. That should look a little bit better. And then finally, the return button, we'll want to make sure that this is centered. So in the alignment property, just set this to center. All right, with that done, you can press F6 and we should now have a nice little option screen where everything should be working properly. All right, this is going to be it for this episode. In 30 minutes, we're able to create our options dialog using our own custom UI with custom UI components, which we created from scratch. And so we can easily reuse these to build our start menu or other UI components. Now, of course, what we have built is actually extremely simple. So anytime you need something a lot more advanced, it might be best to start from the existing Godot UI controls. In the next episode, we'll tie all of this together into the game. Thanks so much for sticking around. We only have 2 episodes left to complete the game and publish it online. If you want to support this channel, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. once I reach 1,000 YouTube subscribers, I'll have you choose the nature of the next tutorial series. Time to take a quick break, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!